Purple Line is a community podcast bringing you in-depth conversations with diverse leaders in the public and private sectors. Whether you're a student looking to gather advice or a professional tuning in for valuable resources, our dynamic programming provides inspiration and insights for all ages and backgrounds. I'm Marianne Gomez-Horta, your host of the Purple Line podcast and the CEO of the Congressional Hispanic Leadership Institute. Welcome. So, Jason, thank you so much for joining us in the Truly Purple Line podcast.
I appreciate the invite. I'm honored.
This is going to be a great conversation to learn about you, your journey. Also really interested in getting some of your advice and some of the data points from your current business that you just launched this year. But before we get to all of that good stuff, I just want to officially say Jason León here with us. He is the CEO and managing partner of executives and boards, which we will get into a little bit more. And like I said, before we get to a little bit of those details, share a little bit with the audience of your journey. You know, we've had a chance and an opportunity to get to know each other for quite a while. I remember your first day in Washington, D.C., which was for a conference. But, you know, you came to Washington from New York. Very much in a leadership development role there as well. So share with our listeners. We have a mix of ages listening, and so I want them to learn a little about you and your journey to DC.
Well, I love that you remember that day. It was for a CEO roundtable.
Yeah.
With the Hispanic Chamber of Commerce, and it all comes full circle. We'll talk more about CEOs and boards and all that in a second. But you know, I always love telling my story because I think there's so many stories that are similar and some of these stories are yet to be told, and hopefully we can inspire people along the way. But I like to call my story Bronx to the Boardroom is how I'll title it.
Bronx to the board.
Yeah.
Okay, so I hadn't heard that one yet. Okay,
Yeah.
All right.
B2B, we'll call it that. But really it starts off as a kid growing up in the Bronx and, you know, finding my way right to eventually Puerto Rico and then to Washington, D.C. It's been kind of the journey along the East Coast, I would say. And, you know, the Bronx taught me a lot of things about myself, my upbringing, but not enough, right? I always wanted to learn more about Puerto Rico, where my parents grew up, my grandparents. I thought I knew good Spanish, but I needed to learn better Spanish. I thought you know, a lot of things you think until you get there, right? And then you have to figure that out. So, you know, my journey goes from the Bronx to Puerto Rico, where I did my undergrad in accounting, and, you know, wanted to quit the first 6 months and say, no, I'm going back.
Oh my gosh. Okay, so hold on. You wanted to quit Puerto Rico in the first 6 months, or the accounting program, or just like a combo?
Yeah, maybe a little bit of both, right? You have to. It's not. Puerto Rico is part of the U.S. You know, fortunately, everyone knows that. But it's different, right? You have to. It's a different culture. But school was tough because it's all in Spanish, and that was the first time to confront that. I thought I had great grade in Spanish, but it's a whole different thing. But you know, hindsight, I think there are stepping stones in life that look like challenges, but actually become what gets you to the next level. And right, having to force myself to learn Spanish in a different way, reading textbooks, translating it, eventually kept me around. And after I got my first report card, it was with a few B's and maybe a C. I eventually figured it out and actually finished first in my class in accounting.
Wow.
And was valedictorian for my class. And
see, you learn something new all the time. I had no idea. That's awesome.
Yeah,
Okay, so but how big was the class? That's all I thought of that. Like I had to ask. You know, I grew up in a small farm worker town, so we had a small class.
It was big enough.
It was big enough. I love it.
It was a few hundred students.
Okay.
It was a big deal.
Well, it's okay.
I got a few medals.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then I said, you know, I'm going back to New York after this.
With all your medals and your valedictorian hat, off you
Yeah,
go.
then I was ready to go back and conquer the Bronx. But actually, what wound up happening was I became the CPA right away, passed the exam, and I said, I'll now go to Big Four.
Oh, wow.
Figure out.
So did you have to take the CPA exam in Puerto Rico and in New York too? Is that what you had to do?
So you could actually take it in any state.
Okay.
And it's the same, at that time, it was the same exam.
Okay.
And it was only twice a year you could take it. So if you failed it, you had to wait till the next 6 months,
Okay.
and you had to take all 2 days in one setting. So it was now it's different.
But in New York, you also had to take it in English.
Yeah, it was in English in Puerto Rico too. So that was one advantage.
Oh, that's interesting. Like,
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah, so it was
Alright.
uniform. So I took it in Puerto Rico, and then eventually passed it, and then said I'm going back.
Okay.
And a mayor comes calling and says, "Hey, you may be interested in being the CFO for our city in Isabela, Puerto Rico." And so, you know what? I really don't even know who the mayor is. You may find out, but and so sometimes
That's hilarious.
sometimes the best interviews or conversations are ones you
just never know.
you walk into
really, yeah.
and you could be yourself. And so we negotiated, and I became the leader for their finance department. And 5 years later, I look back and saw what we did in that city. And I go back today, see sidewalks, parks, statues we built. And
Really, that's cool.
that was just part of it. It was more about getting them back to a financially stable position.
Mhm.
And helping the staff. Some of my best stories were from one day I wrote a book about that time. I probably would never take that job today if it was offered. And not in a bad way. It's just so much
Yeah.
risk. And I think
It's
that's,
a different environment.
yeah, in life we get older, take less risk. I think that's probably a theme,
That's true.
that we have to figure out how to
Yeah.
overturn.
The younger we are, is that if there's this great, I tell the students in our internship programs, right, that you don't know what you don't know. Like, growing up, like I said, in a farm worker camp, or students that we have, like for some of them, it's the first time they've been on an airplane to come to Washington, D.C. It's the first time they've been in a major office. And the idea of like even interning from member of Congress, anything like that is it's just beyond what you would think of, right? You don't see it on TV or on their social media that they follow. So a lot of times it's, we don't know what we don't know. And then later on, it's when you know something, you can't unlearn it, right? So that's the other part that comes with that. When you learn something, most of the time, we're obligated to serve or to contribute once we have more information. So that's really interesting. I love how you were able to. It's also interesting how you went to Puerto Rico to go to college. Curious why you did that if you hadn't really grown up in Puerto Rico.
Yeah. So I have family there today. And so it was opportunity to go back and spend more time there. But ultimately it came down to language. I was always embarrassed. I would say this, that I didn't know who the different, right, the great leaders of Puerto Rico were, like about it in that. Hernandez Colon, and people who really made Puerto Rico what it is today.
Yeah.
And so it was kind of this opportunity to say, you know what, I'll use the term, there's Eurekan is a very used term, and it's because someone who grew up in New York and is Puerto Rican, but never really lived in Puerto Rico.
Isn't that Jennifer Lopez?
Yeah, there you go. Steph, there you go.
All right.
That's
Just to make sure like the audience knows who all
that's a great example.
Yeah, right.
But I call myself a New Rican with credentials, right? Because I actually lived, worked, voted, and contributed there. So I think it's a little different when you could do that.
You went from being like, I guess it was a CFO.
Yeah.
And then moving back to New York. What were you doing when you came back to the mainland?
So, there came a point in my career in government, and I love government. I think it offers for young people, particularly, opportunities to do things that you could maybe never do at a higher setting. And so you learn on the job sometimes, but it really prepared you for the future. I thought I was going to become a city manager at that point.
Okay.
It was the track I was going to run. So an organization which I encourage many to look at, National Urban Fellows, comes calling and says, hey, we'll give you a master's in public administration. And then you'll do a fellowship and come out of that, paid to tackle a new role. Little did I know, I would be a fellow at the Robert Johnson Foundation in New Jersey. And that opened my eyes up to a whole new world of how foundations think about, I would say they think about generations, and then politicians think about the next election, right? And so it was kind of a juxtaposition on how the two worlds collide. And I said, wow, if I knew so much about public health back when I was a city administrator, I really could have put more money into certain things or seen the value in how a sidewalk could maybe decrease heart disease in certain communities. So much you learned. And that took me on this new journey of leadership, I would say, and really working with organizations that build leaders for tomorrow in different worlds, corporate settings, nonprofit, and then ultimately corporate settings.
So you mentioned that the Urban Fellows Program came and tapped you on the shoulder. How did that even happen? Like, what were you doing, or what was your position? How is it that they found you? I mean, and that's one of the things that's also kind of really interesting, right? So from a leadership perspective, we talk about, using your voice, what you stand for, what your thought leadership area is. But it's really interesting when somebody else comes and says, "Hey, I've been listening to you. I've been watching you. Come and join this group." How did that happen?
So yeah, part of it was me finding them first. And I used to get every year the U.S. News and World Report and see which were the top grad schools and
Okay, good.
find that. And then as I was reading about New York and Baruch College in this case, I saw that there was a program that had a fellowship component, and I reached out and somebody came and saw the director reached out to me. So sometimes it's about raising your hand first.
Yeah,
And not just waiting for someone to tap you, but once they do tap and say, "Hey, I'm interested," and I see what you're doing, you have to go a lot, right?
and you have to be ready for it.
Yeah, ready for the opportunity. So at that point, I was ready for it. It was an opportunity. I think some people go to grad school too soon, and you need kind of this balance of some real world experience where the ups and downs you go through, you can actually now go to grad school and say, "Hey, I could apply this because I have real examples that the theory
Right.
can fit into." It was just that for me. I think it really showed me a lot about leadership, management. But I like to say the MPA side is the good side, where the MBAs are over there trying to.
Okay, I don't know. See, I did the whole MBA. So we would have never been in class together if we were in school together, because I totally avoided all the accounting classes. I studied communications and a little bit more on the marketing side. But then when I went to corporate and McDonald's Corporation and the marketing department, I realized, okay, I got the numbers, but I kind of need to know it at a different level. So I actually went to a community college to take an accounting class before I enrolled in the MBA, because I knew that was the class that was going to get me.
Oh, and I was smart.
So,
Yeah.
again, try to, you also have to know yourself. Self-awareness is important. And I knew I needed to take that accounting class to make it through.
That was a good move. Well, when I introduce myself at meetings, I say I'm a recovering CPA. I don't practice anymore, but I keep the license.
Yeah.
And I keep the professional education courses going. And I think that's a great lesson for all of us. Like these licenses, the papelito, as they say, like
Right.
they matter and they get you into doors and, open the conversation. And I think, later on we'll talk about board service and how like those kind of credentials and experiences, we never know how they open those doors.
That's true.
I do like accounting, but I don't love it in the sense where I'm not doing it.
You're not doing it anymore.
But it gives you a good eye for a lot of things in leadership.
Oh, definitely.
Helpful.
So, we talked around at the beginning about you coming to Washington. What year was that?
It was 2012.
2012, okay.
Yeah, and
All right.
the introduction was an interesting one, and it was part of like this concept of mentorship and sponsorship.
Mm-hmm.
And I had really, thankfully, to National Number Fellows in this fellowship, learned that like you can't just wait for people to say, "I want to be your mentor." Like you have to go seek the people out and say, "Hey, I'm interested. I'm ready. And I'm prepared." And I met a gentleman by the name of Carlos Horta, who you may know.
Yes. Full transparency, that's my husband.
Yes. So this is before he was your husband.
Yes.
And we're sitting at an event, a Latina style event, right? Robert Barr.
Right.
And Carlos is sitting next to me, and I say, "Hey, you really caught my eye with some of the things we were talking about in your organization, which is, at that time was the Hispanic Association on Corporate Responsibility. A lot of words, right?
Yeah.
Hassan. And I came back to him and said, "Hey, I would love for you to mention me. I will come prepared every quarter with questions that I could ask you and you could answer, and that's all I ask." And for about a year, I would come to DC once in a while for meetings, and he would say, and we would have coffee or maybe a cocktail and discuss certain things. And eventually, he said, "Hey, what if you came and worked together with me at Hassan?" And we negotiated, and then off I was to Washington, D.C.
Yeah. And so it's really interesting because you also had, as you mentioned earlier, all the credentials, right? You had like the perspective of different Puerto Rico, of New York, an undergrad, a master's, how a fellowship worked, how a nonprofit or a big foundation worked. And then because at HACR, as I said, you really have that whole combination, right? With the pillars of, and Chile has been a member of the ESED board of directors, so I'm very familiar with, the four pillars of governance, philanthropy, employment, and
Procurement.
procurement is the other one. I always forget procurement
Yeah, it's
in that mix. But doing a deeper dive on the governance piece, kind of jumping a little bit ahead. Now you've gone and taken your business into a different path, or your career into a different path. Really focused on the governance side, on different aspects of it. And so like I said in the beginning, you started this business this year. Congratulations.
Thank you.
After being an advisor to some major corporations, search committees on the governance nominating committees for major corporations, major foundations as well. Share with us a little bit about what you've learned. But before that, share with us some stats, like how many Latinos are on corporate boards? And then follow up with that. Why does that matter?
I'm glad you asked about governance. It's one of my favorite topics. And probably one, when we talk about boards, it's kind of a mystery, I think, for a lot of people, how to navigate
True.
and figure out, where do I fit in? Is this something for me? And that's something we're trying at executive and boards to really dispel that, right? This is an area you could really, early in your career, tap into, whether it's at local levels on sometimes your tenants association board or your local nonprofit.
True.
And eventually maybe even a corporate board. But you have to start somewhere, and it's important not to start too late. And so, while working at HACR, we constantly looked at the levels of Latinos on boards, and right, the needle hasn't moved much. Right now, you take the Fortune 1000, of the seats on the Fortune 1000, 5% belong to Latinos. And you look at our economic contributions to the U.S., it's 3.2 trillion. And so it doesn't equal.
Yeah.
Right. And what's missing really, where some companies are missing, is not having the insight into those communities that are needed, and those business opportunities to really seize them and perhaps avoid mistakes they could make along the way, and really engage different areas within society. So, as you look at the Fortune 1000, 40% of the companies have one Latino on their board.
Wow.
So that means 60% of the Fortune 1000 are missing a Latino on their board. How is that possible today? I don't know.
Yeah, that's crazy. And this is also, even with like mergers and acquisitions, or if a company dissolves or splits and all of that, the math still, no matter what happens, we're still not represented, right? I mean, at a share that we should be to represent the population of the United States.
Yeah, no, we're way too far. If you think about our population, we should be probably closer to 30% of each board should have probably 3 Latinos on every board, or 2. And right, each board is a different size, but you don't want to put people on a board just because they're from Puerto Rico or whatever it is. It's really about a combination of perspectives that they bring to a board. And so, over the past, I would say 15 years of my career, it really has been, whether it was at HACR first, really pushing companies and helping them figure out how to create pipelines to diversify at those top levels. But then at some point, it becomes about how do you get on the inside, the inside-outside game, as it's called. And that's where I spent 10 years recently with a national search firm, really helping to bring those people I met along the way onto corporate boards and introduce new faces to those boards. So I really wanted to take all that 10 years of experience of managing the DC office for the firm and say, hey, we don't spend enough time with candidates to really help them figure this out. We just want them to come ready to go into a slate.
Yeah, that's what I was going to ask you too, because people talk about like a resume, right? And we know that you need a different resume, sort of, or CV or whatever it's called. I don't know what it's called.
Board bio.
Board bio. But one of the things that sometimes comes up, even at a junior level, at a college level, and when we're working with college students and recent college graduates, is nowadays is that you have to have all the right words and the right phrases and just the right elements in your resume. I can imagine that that's even a little more fine-tuned that you need in a board bio, right?
Yeah. So we sit down with candidates all the time and give them insight into just some really technical things that they need to have in their board bio to really get noticed, right? And some of that is making sure they're putting in terms that speak to issues that governance and boards, right, think about. Risk, right? Enterprise risk management. You have audit committees and all these different topics, CEO succession. Those are things that we want to see when we recruit for boards, like who has been through these experiences. And so you have to start somewhere. And so
Right.
you talked about earlier raising your hand, right? And
Right.
I think this is one area where people don't raise their hand soon enough. And by raising your hand, it means telling your boss sometimes, like, hey, if there's an opportunity for one of our corporate partners to like sit on one of their advisory boards or help out with a corporate initiative, I want to do it.
Right.
And little by little, the closer you get to the boardrooms of your company, other companies, or just even in a nonprofit setting, I sit on the board of Garland Hispanic Theater, and that's been a passion for the past 10 plus years. But, there are little beginnings sometimes that help you understand like the balance of helping a company or an organization, right, become financially stable, have good governance, and they prepare you for that next role. And so today I sit on the board of Care First here in the DMV, which is one of the largest health insurers in the Atlantic region, 13 billion in revenue.
And you started on health before that, right? Because isn't it with a foundation you were on the fellow?
Interesting enough, when in Puerto Rico, I as part of the city, we had a hospital. So I learned a little bit there about hospital administration of a hospital, and then Robert Wood Johnson teaches me about what is public health and what are different health inequities, and you really start learning piece by piece. And then fast forward, you combine the finance background, the board work we've done, and then all that comes together to Care First, which does amazing work in the community. But it really has been an opportunity for me to really learn more about governance. But it all happened, interesting enough, because someone I knew who sits on a pretty big Fortune 100 company, a candidate at one point, said, hey, I think you should speak with Jason because he's ready and available.
Wow, that's awesome.
But it's about kind of raising your hand and telling people I'm interested. So I tell executives all the time who are at the end of their career, say, hey, I want to get on a board. How do I do it? And I say, well, maybe we should have started sooner, but let's not give up.
Yeah, exactly.
Let's think about the people and that combination of getting the skill sets, but also making sure people are in your corner.
So what are let me back up a little bit here into this, is that I started very young being involved on boards of education, nonprofits, growing up in California, and really seeing how you can add value and how you could have a voice for the community from a smaller nonprofit and kind of grow up in that. So I was very much in tune with the nonprofits and serving on boards. And one of the things that I did as I moved from one nonprofit to the other is I strategically served on committees that I wasn't that savvy in so that I could learn it there because I wasn't going to learn it at work. So, for example, I was on the board of the Heart Association for the California region. We were consolidating some regions. And I intentionally make sure that I was sitting on the budget committee and the investment committee because, again, I'm the one that ditched the accounting classes early on. So I wanted to learn. And at the time, I worked at Coors Brewing Company, which has nothing to do with the Heart Association, right? But I used it as an opportunity to learn some of the language, learn how to be able to talk to people who had different skill sets. So what is that balance that you recommend for people to get into the space or the committees where they do know what's the topic at hand, and then also where they can learn something new? Is there a secret sauce in that?
Yeah, I think it's courage sometimes to know what you don't know and then actually dive into topics. I could tell you there's been so many times I do a search for a company and I don't know more than them, and I know I need to learn pretty quick, right? And sometimes it means you're gonna have to take more time to study a topic. And on boards, that happens too, right? I'm involved in committees right now that I'm not an expert, but I take my time to really search, and sometimes ChatGPT helps me to catch up on what I don't know, right? And so there's ways to kind of help yourself subsidize some of the experience you need or borrow. And borrowing experience is another key thing. Sometimes you have to have those mentors in your life or people who are willing to pick up the phone and tell you, it's like, hey, I need some advice. governance topic or this topic in my work, and they give you a perspective. So I think you're wise to say, hey, let me try to join some committees or things that I don't know much about, because it's a great way to learn on the job. And too many people take their day job, and get frustrated with it and say, oh, I want to do this, I want to do that, I'm going to quit, I want to get a bigger job. But they don't realize that you could actually use board service to kind of supplement the areas you're not
Right.
getting in your day job. And then, that'll be an accelerator for your day job. And then it just starts adding and stacking, kind of like compound interest for your career.
Yeah, definitely. 'Cause you just never know where those different opportunities are going to come. And then also just being of service, right? And being a servant leader, you get an opportunity to help in different arenas, and then you're able to connect people together or organizations together that maybe they would have never been able to find each other, without you or without some of the things that you're working on.
Yeah, I like to say I think board service has the opportunity to accelerate, right, in community, industry, and career. And you just never know, and maybe all of the above at one point, how you could be connecting, impacting. So it's such a powerful area. I think younger folks need to think about now and say, well, that's an opportunity for me. How do I start raising my hand for those opportunities now? Even mid-career, right? Just telling your boss, hey, I'm interested in this, I'm ready. What courses can I take? What organizations are out there? Like the Latino Corporate Directors Association is a great one. I tell everyone, go join. I could tell you about 4 or 5 people I've introduced, and now they sit on boards.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah, and
Okay.
it's kind of the networking and preparation. So that's what we're trying to do at executive boards, like really not just place people, but help them find their way to navigate all this ecosystem of board readiness and mystery behind
I love it.
interviewing.
So great segue, Jason, into my next question here is, what's your advice? What's your advice, and particularly to young professionals, graduated from college, they're in their first job, looking to see what they're going to do next. But then there's also just this world of different opportunities. So kind of thinking about what you're doing now in your journey, what is maybe 1 or 2 pieces of advice?
Yeah. So I would really start thinking about how can I start getting into this world of governance boards as soon as possible.
Okay.
And I would probably start by looking at nonprofit opportunities, like what's something you care about or maybe don't know enough about, as Marianne said. And like I did at one point, I joined the theater board. I really don't know much about theater, but it was an opportunity to give back to the Latino community for me. So I learned more about along the way just because of that experience. So I think I would really figure out how to start becoming a board member of some sort really quickly, and then see how you like that, and maybe you will, and then join another board, right? And figure out how you could be the best board member. I tell people all the time, like each board that you sit on, small or large, is a data point for people to know, are you someone that they want on their next board?
Oh, that's a good one.
And so it becomes more about the people skills on those levels, not so much, not as much about what do you know, but how do you get along and make decisions together. And so that would be my first big piece of advice to young folks.
Do you have a second piece of advice?
Yeah, I mentioned it a lot during our conversation, but like raise your hand. And sometimes you got to take the job or the opportunity that nobody wants to do. But if it gets you closer to maybe that boardroom opportunity, or even preparing the report that your boss's boss is going to take a boardroom, like that gets you a little bit more access. You'd be surprised how many candidates I've interviewed at really top levels. And I say, hey, what other boards have you served on? And they've done none of it.
Oh, interesting.
It comes up so many times. They say, no, I don't have the time. I was just working hard and never done anything in the nonprofit or even within their job. And there's so many, every organization, Chile serves so many corporate partners.
Right.
And there's always an opportunity to raise your hand on something or another. And so I think there's so many missed opportunities that it sometimes makes me sad to see. If they would have done these things, they would have been so much closer to now being able to compete on a
different level.
Yeah. So those are the things I
love that
guy.
Yeah, because part of it too is that with Chile, right, we have leadership development programs, we have fellowships, we have leadership conferences. And there's a lot of times when people are just so excited and you're trying to figure out what to do next. And we tell, it's a good opportunity to raise your hand, to use your voice, to contribute. But sometimes raising your hand can also be a little scary. But I think that's part of that balance, right? To what you had said earlier, like kind of figure out what you do know, what you maybe want to contribute in, and take an opportunity on yourself, take a risk on yourself too, and contribute at different levels. So,
Yeah.
so I love that.
And keep telling people, remind people what you know, what you're interested in. Because a great boss always told me, like, we all assume our bosses know what we want.
Oh my God,
to
totally.
accomplish, right? It's like, oh, they know what I want.
Right.
And we have a lot going on, right? So we don't want to remember those
So,
things.
or we forget about those opportunities. So we love to ask, and I love to ask all of our guests to kind of think back to when you were in college. Could be undergrad or in your master's, but what was your favorite class and why?
I'm going to give you two. There was one really quick.
All right.
It's a fun story. One of my professors in undergrad, he was a surfer, and I used to surf in Puerto Rico.
Okay.
And so it was always fun to go to the class and like and know that we surfed together in the morning, but now
Oh
I
my
had some
gosh.
technique grade. So that was fun. But in grad school, there was one class, communications, which
Okay.
is not funny enough, my wife is an expert communicator.
Right.
And I'm not. And so that class I learned so much. And the professor actually was quoted in the New York Times for a book he wrote, and the theme was about there's a saying that you're more likely to get struck by lightning than to find a spouse. And once you remarry, I think it was.
You wrote that book?
Yeah, I'm messing up the
Oh
quote,
my
but it's
gosh.
very similar. So he was the actual professor, so we were all like wowed by the reference. But I learned so much from communications from a standpoint of right when you write your emails, like even
Right.
just making sure the first line tells the reader what they need to do or know.
Right.
So it was a class I'd never forget for a few reasons.
I love this. So your class that you liked was communications, and the classes that I avoided were accounting.
Yeah.
Okay, great, Jason.
If we match our
Yeah, we would have run into each other like at the International Student Club or something like that. Who knows? But thanks again, Jason, for joining us and walking with us on the Purple Line. Very much appreciate your time, your contributions, and again, the best of luck with executives and boards. We'd love to hear what else is going on, and hopefully one of these days you'll be getting phone calls from a Chile intern, former intern, or maybe even a Chile board member to help out. So thanks again, Jason.
Looking forward to it. Congrats on the Purple Line. What a great idea, and a way to give back.
Thank you. Thanks for listening to The Purple Line. Follow us on social media at The Chili, at THECHLI. Thank you for joining us on The Purple Line.